You're listening to China Africa Talk.
Jambo, ni Bridget akikuletea kipindi kinachohusiana na China na Afrika.
Vous écoutez le dialogue sino-africain avec Bridget.
Everything China, everything Africa.
Olá, você está ouvindo China Africa Talk com Bridget.
سيداتي وسادتي مرحبا بكم في الحوار الصيني العربي مع بريدجيت.
A pleasure having you tuned into the program. You're listening to China Africa Talk. I'm your host, Bridget Mutambirwa, coming to you from the Chinese capital in Beijing, and I bring you discussions on what's happening with China and Africa from a Chinese and African perspective. The 11th Nishan Forum on World Civilizations, held in Qufu, eastern China's Shandong province, has brought together more than 560 guests from over 70 countries and regions to explore the relationship between cultural diversity and modernization. Among the key topics is the impact of artificial intelligence and the future of human civilization. As AI becomes increasingly embedded in our life, questions arise about its relevance to human civilization itself and the potential risks it poses to cultural authenticity and human creativity. Meanwhile, the Ministerial meeting of the Global Civilizations Dialogue takes place in Beijing on July the 10th to the 11th, under the theme of safeguarding diversity of human civilizations for world peace and development. This high-level gathering signals new opportunities for collaboration in cultural industries and cross-border infrastructure development as nations seek to build a more inclusive and culturally respectful global future. Edwin Etiebu, Professor of Philosophy at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa, and Professor Xiang Shucheng, Professor of Philosophy at Xidian University, join us again for more discussions. Last week we had a discussion about the Nishan Forum from a broader perspective, and there's one topic that I remember Professor Etiebu highlighting just briefly when he was talking about artificial intelligence, and I thought, okay, let me just go through this again, and I thought it would be quite exciting and different to talk about. I'll refer this question to both of you here. The 11th Nishan Forum on World Civilizations explores 6 key subtopics, including the impact of artificial intelligence on the human civilization. AI has become a transformative force globally, but how should one understand its relevance to the evolution of human civilization? Maybe we'll start with you, Professor Xiang.
So thank you so much for inviting me again. But from my point of view, I'm quite what you could call a humanistic about AI.
Okay.
I think that humans have always had technology, and this is just a newer version of technology that we've had. So from my perspective, if I can explain the kind of cultural anthropology point, the anthropologists have noted that what's unique about humans is that we're a cultural species. That means that we actually evolved with culture, which is very from other animals. Anthropologists have noted that humans became what we are after a very, very short span of time. That means that we couldn't have evolved to be what we are. The people who use like technology, language, and these kind of cultural infrastructures, we couldn't have evolved to be what we are through just biological processes alone. It's impossible for biology alone to account for what we actually became. So they note that it's actually the human, they created tools and then they passed on that knowledge. We're very pro-social animals, and we kind of cumulatively learn together through a kind of cumulative kind of cultural evolutions. We learn how to use tools, and these tools, we end up being very reliant on these kind of, these externally created cultural infrastructures, which include technology. That's really very distinguishing of humans as a species. So I think of AI as really a new iteration of what we've always been, really. That's always a perspective that we can keep in mind.
It's like an additional tool to the previous tools that we used to have long time ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. How about you, Professor Tib?
Yeah, I think I agree with Professor Zian. She's captured quite clearly what the part of technology is in terms of human civilization. And sometimes we tend to pull this apart to think that they're different. Quite not true, because technology is just part of our cultural existence, the way in which we develop and continuously harness our environment and nature and for survival. If you go back to even the very primitive stage of the cave humans, use of stone, like trying to create fire. Those are also different kind of technology, but just very kind of early stage of technology. Not so AI is just one of such technology in a you might say yes, advanced and sophisticated stage. And I think that's part of what your question is trying to bring at, because your question it also implies that AI has become a transformative force globally, which also recognizes that as a technology system, it's quite sophisticated and advanced and has created quite a bit of transformation in human existence. But so if we understand human civilization as the totality of human creation and the way social organizations, cultures, way of life, technologies have developed throughout this time, then in that sense, AI can then be understood as just simply part of human civilization. That's what it is, So but the reference to AI being a transformative force globally is quite poignant for me, because it not only is a transformative force, for me, it's a massive hurricane. It's a tsunami in a sense.
You're scaring
Human
us.
civilization. No, it is a tsunami. But then you're asking how we should understand the relevance of AI to the evolution of human civilization. Well, within the context of one of the 6 subtopics of the Nishan Forum was civilization, which is the subtopic regarding the impact of artificial intelligence on human civilization. The truth of the matter is that AI being part of human civilization is yet to stay. There's nothing we can do about it. It's a tsunami. It's not going anywhere. This is the stage we are now as humans. We just must live with it, embrace it, enjoy it, find ways to sort of avoid all the risks and challenges and problems that it may pose. All right, just quickly to add, given that AI has started to revolutionizing many industries and businesses, so we can talk about, from healthcare to education, from finance to sports, from the environment to climate change, so many different ways in which AI has completely seeped into our various lives. We must take full advantage of the benefits, some of it which in the area of improved efficiency and standards. We must enjoy those benefits. Reduction in costs, increase in accuracy in various fields. We must harness these benefits and the potential. But while simultaneously we guide against the harms and the risk and challenges that AI poses.
Okay. Professor Xiang, what practical steps can societies take to ensure that AI serves as a tool to enhance rather than diminish the development of human civilization? Because that's I think a lot of people, maybe they're paranoid or maybe anti-AI. That's where the issue is, where, the whole purpose of AI. What can societies do to ensure that AI serves as a tool to enhance, keyword enhance?
I think that, again, we should always think of AI as just as a tool that meant to serve humans. So, and I think it's very important to focus on the human. So we have, all of these very glossy tech people who promise that technology is going to do all these things, and then they make beautiful narratives. A lot of it's capitalism, they want to get more money for what they do. But I think very importantly, we should always still remember that it's meant to serve the human. And then I think if we have that fundamental mindset, then that's the baseline we should have, that it's a tool to serve the human. And then that also means that if it's a tool, then it has to be, you can use it for good things and for bad things. And then the fundamental lessons of how to control it and how to maximize its use comes from really understand the fundamental human point of what is good for us. I think if we take that as a kind of fundamental principle and not to lose sight of the fact that it's still the human who can resolve the issues, the moral problems, the political problems, all of the problems of the human of our world, it's still going to be the human being who creatively makes these solutions. AI is never going to become powerful enough to resolve things on its own. For example, it can be an aid, it can be a tool, but then the creative solutions, the way we think about these problems, we still have to do it ourselves, and we have to go through the kind of, there's no shortcut to that. On the practical level, what we do in practice should still be based on certain principles. And then the principle the mindset that you should never lose sight of is the fact that nothing can ever replace hard work of, for example, moral cultivation, thinking about other people, the needs of other people, what other people struggle with. These are the things that will help you understand what limitations need to be given for tools such as AI.
And what about the challenges and risks there, Professor Etiebu? How can we proactively safeguard human values and cultural diversity in an AI-driven future? What's your take on that?
challenges and risks are numerous. I mean, where do I begin from? I can list quite a few risks and challenges related to privacy, lack of transparency, violations of human rights, misinformation or manipulation, which sometimes is called deep fakes, where people sort of create images or videos of somebody who is not the person. So it looks like the person is one talking, whereas it's not the person talking. Bias or prejudice, you have challenges regarding to job loss or displacement, issues regarding challenges with exclusion and socioeconomic inequality, the aspect of loss of human connections, which is part of what Professor is talking about. You need humans to develop virtues, moral awareness, and relationship, so there's that risk or worry. And then, of course, there's also the risk or challenge of the dependence on AI. But let me zero in on this last one, which is the dependence on AI.
Yeah.
And in focusing on this, I will sum up my comment by saying that if we want to proactively safeguard human values and cultural diversity, in short, if we want to safeguard humanity in an AI-driven future, then we'll have to take, of course, practical steps to ensure that AI, as of course Professor Zhang has talked about, AI is for humans. We developed by humans as part of civilization for human benefit. It's not supposed to be our enemy, like Star Wars, where the AI is one enemy on the other side, humans are the enemy on the other side. So the development must be for our greatest good. That should be the watchword, right? So in other words, to mitigate this risk and challenges, we must keep in mind that AI should not replace humans, should not diminish the development of civilization. And to do this, we do need to maintain complete oversight and control over AI systems so as to ensure that development are reasonable, the use ethical and responsible. And having made this point, I want to underline the fact that generally one of the fears, of course, of AI, which of course I've listed the risk, has also to do with this aspect that we may be too dependent on AI to such a stage that this dependence may eventually cause the replacement of humans by AI.
That's been a big scare.
Yeah, so this fear comes out in the aspect of the job loss, displacement, the connection and all of that. But I think one of the greatest fear, which people probably don't talk much about, which is probably happening now, is in the area of AI may eventually replace human thinking on mind, or maybe not replace human thinking on mind completely,
the dependency
but
becomes
diminish it. And once that is diminished, for me, the fear would be it is the fear of the death of humans. Why do I say so? Because imagine if AI starts doing all of our thinking over time. Okay. Now, of course, Professor Zhang has talked about it can't solve our problems, it's political, economic. But we're talking about bread and butter of AI, the abstract thinking, the algorithm, and all of that. So imagine if AI starts doing all of that. What that would mean is that humans will lose the ability to think, and in thinking.
Yeah. And we were made naturally
and
to
not
think.
talking about critical thinking itself that we probably may lose. Think about our computers or even our calculators. Very simple examples I want to use here. How many of us still have the ability to calculate and spell words like we used to when we were younger,
primary school,
back?
Yes.
Yeah. How many people? I'm talking here about people who probably are in their 30s, late 30s, 40s, 50s, their midlife, who have transited from both analog, where there were no computers or no smart devices, and all of that, no calculators in this way we have it now, and now they have calculators. I have, for one, am that. Look, I was very good at spellings. I can't spell anymore because I rely on word processor to spell for me. In terms of calculators, I can't calculate anything anymore. Sometimes I calculate like 10 plus 12. I'm like, okay, where's my calculator? And you go to that. Whereas before you calculate using your brain. So I have lost.
Our fathers, our grandfathers, they could calculate very fast.
Exactly. So we have lost the ability to calculate. That's what it means. We are relying on calculators, right? We've lost the ability to spell. So that's the worry for me for the AI here. Is the dependence on AI is that we'll get to a point where we will not be able to be thinking. And once we lose that ability, we would have lost something that is distinctively human. So we must guard against that. Because once we lose that will be the end of humans. That will be the death of humans. And once we kaput, that is the end of civilization in a sense. Because we need to have the thinking ability, critical thinking, to be able to continuously develop civilization and culture and all of that. We've seen that with our students, for example, now. Students write essays.
ChatGPT.
What it means is that they are not doing the work. They're not even engaging with the material. They are not thinking about it at all. So over time, they won't be able, you give them problem in a place of work, they can't think, they can't write because they've not cultivated the ability through their education.
Professor Xiang, specifically for China, what are some of the key concerns related to AI's impact on civilization, which should be addressed to ensure responsible and ethical development?
I agree with Professor Etiabu about over-reliance on AI and then losing the ability to think, because I also see it in the classrooms of students when they give me work. I know they did it through some AI DeepSeek or something. And I think that with the rise of these new technologies, there will be these kind of new challenges. That's a very kind of concrete example of the kind of challenges that need to be met for responsible and ethical development. On just like an education level, maybe we go back to kind of more analog things, such as for the end of the year exam, the thing that really mattered, I made sure that they think they were in an environment completely free from any access to internet or anything like that. And I think that recently China, for the high school entrance exams, the Gaokao, they made sure that DeepSeek was shut down for the few hours, I think, because even though you're not allowed to bring phones into the examination hall, but there's still a risk that maybe they figured out some way to access the internet and then sort of cheat through using AI. So I feel like an interesting example where the Chinese government's faced with the challenges of AI, and it seems like at that time maybe the solution was just to shut it down. So that's very interesting, because then all of these measures are very collective measures. It's because only the government has the kind of amount of power to enforce. To at an individual level, you kind of have no immunity to AI, to maybe to games. It's very difficult for each individual to sort of have the willpower to right. So that's maybe one interesting conclusion to come to, the fact that it has to be a very collective power that deals with these issues. So the kind of bigger issues to address, I think, are still issues about inequality, such as race, gender, and class. I still think AI is still, to some extent, parasitic off of humans. The information that is fed into AI, if it just takes information from that's generated by humans, then we're all there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of sexism, right? And so that's gonna shape the information that is available to the AI. And then when you ask AI things, they're going to give you information that's already biased to these extents, and then that ends up being kind of like an echo. If you're relying on AI, then you're going to have this kind of echo chamber where these prejudices just, or structural and just further entrenched. For responsible and ethical development, AI is still just the same kind of issues that again, that face how do you make things more just, because it's only ever going to reflect what we are already.
Professor Tiabu, global technological advancements often leave Africa behind. How can this subtopic of the forum contribute to more inclusive digital participation and better integration of Africa's civilizations into the global AI landscape?
Thank you very much. This is a very important question. And yes, it is true. Global technological development often leaves Africa behind. We focus on Africa here, but this is the case with other less developed countries or civilizations or less affluent people. Usually they lag behind in assessing, being able to take advantage of the full benefit of technology, partly because, technologies, when they come out, they're usually very expensive, costly, difficult to access. Wealthy, affluent countries and civilizations usually are in forefront of such development and able to access such technologies. So that's why I think that the 11th Nishan Forum on World Civilization, I guess, is right by including this subtopic regarding the impact of artificial intelligence on human civilization as part of the broader theme of beauty and diversity of civilizations. So I think that's the first step. That's the first step of including Africa, of including less affluent civilizations into part of this AI landscape. So the first step is what the Nishan Forum is doing, is to say, let's talk about this. Let's see what we can bring to the table and talk about every aspect of this technology. But that shouldn't be the only step, of course. So the discussion is important. So the second step, I would think, would be, of course, to recognize the cost of having AI technologies and systems and the importance of providing support for Africa and others that are less affluent to be able to take advantage of the food benefit. Because it's one way to say, let's come to a forum like Nishan Forum to have discussions, to talk about this, which is fine. Just talking will not bridge the gap between the haves and the haves not. The talking part would ensure that Africa is part of not just the discussion, but part of the development of AI.
Right.
Okay, because the whole idea is to say, just as Professor has said, is about bias, prejudice, where the algorithm of AI is as such developed that are generally responsive to some cultural ideas that are not diverse enough, right? You know, so there's the prejudice, there's discrimination, or there's exclusion of minority of other cultures and all of that in the data small part of the algorithm and all of that. So the discussion part is to ensure that Africa then brings part of this whole cultural paraphernalia into the development of AI, not just Africa, but of course, every culture and civilization. And I think that's the discussion part of the Nishan Forum will do to say, okay, well, how do we continue to develop AI by bringing every of these cultural elements and civilizations to be part of it. But once you've done the development, then there's the usage part, right? You know, which is then expensive and costly. Africa must also have access to the usage, you know, and that's then require the kind of support that may be provided by those who obviously have more resources, so that at least the issue of socioeconomic inequalities will not be reinforced or continuously re-entrenched. So practical and deliberate steps that must be taken to not to include everyone in discussion, every culture. But the more important is, of course, when you get every culture, civilization to be part of the development, then you are setting that different values, the AI will reflect different values, and then the beauty in diversity would really now shine through, which the Nishan Forum is doing. And then, of course, we do need guardrails around AI. Those will require developing policies, you know, that will be globally acceptable around the use of AI. And that would require also the contribution from Africa, every other civilization to also be part of providing these policies and guardrails.
Now, but both Chinese and African civilizations have passed down certain knowledge and values through oral storytelling. As generative AI increasingly produces stories, art, and cultural content, what are potential risks to cultural authenticity and human creative ownership?
Let me present what I think is quite a Confucian view.
Okay.
For Confucianism, there is something very distinctive about what it is to be human. And so for the Mencius, what is distinctive of being human is the fact that you have what he calls a 良知, which is you could call a moral knowing. But then the moral, so it's just by innately. And he gives the example of a child who's about to fall in a well. Any human who sees that, you'll feel something, and you'll have this kind of pro-social instinct to save the child. And he further divides that kind of innate responsiveness that we have into 4 different components, which are all based on feelings. There's a feeling of towards elders, for example, and then also this ability to approve or disapprove. And these are partly they're rational, but they're mostly based on feeling. As kind of the particular kind of species that we are, we're just born with this capacity. So I still have some more of optimism that AI can never do this, because you have to be in an embodied organism in order. Animals to some extent have this too, but they don't have it to quite the same extent that we do. And that's what makes you distinctively human. If you think of it that way, fundamentally, AI can never do that, because they're not embodied. They can't feel because they don't die.
What are your thoughts on that question?
I want to sort of begin this question answered by reading from, let me see if I have it here in my phone. I want to read something that I think I will come back to towards the end. So recently, a band called the Velvet Sundown has had its tracks, which is mostly a blend of laid-back 1970s inspired rock and modern indie pop, played hundreds of thousands of times, close to 1 million actually, on Spotify since appearing several weeks ago. The band has a verified page on the music streaming platform and more than 850,000 monthly listeners. People who listen to his music seem to like and enjoy it, although it seems like people do not know for sure what the band is, given that none of the 4 named musicians in the band have given any interviews or appear to have individual social media accounts, and there are no records of any live performances. A couple of days ago, the band spokesman, who goes by the name of Andrew Frelon, had admitted that Velvet Sundown's music had been generated using an AI tool called Sono. That is not all. The man, Andrew Frelon, is himself a host. Account on X formerly Twitter, which seems to have been taken over by someone trying to hijack the identity of the Velvet Sundown, claims to be the band's official China, is also fake.
My
And a
goodness.
statement on the band's Spotify page says that the group has no affiliation with this Andrew Frelon. The man, Andrew Frelon, said it was a deliberate plot to host the media, and the complicated rules and the way the whole thing has played out become like an artistic jet fuel. All right. The story tells us of all that we need to know about some of the additional problems of AI. That's what it tells us, right? So everything about the band, the music is AI generated, the band does not exist.
This is making a fool out of human beings.
Exactly. Imagine the people who are listening, like, oh, when are we going to go to a concert involving the Velvet Sundown? There's no concert, because there's no band. The first problem here, which is obvious to all of us, is that AI is making it now difficult for us to tell the difference between what is real and not real. Okay. And when this happens, our collective grip or an understanding of reality becomes shaky. Now, how am I supposed to know tomorrow I listen to the music, whether this music is AI generated? I can't know. Or to know that this band I think is real, actually is fake. So are you asking me to do like research?
Life needs to be more serious.
That is the point. But this will continue to happen as the story of the Velvet Sundown has shown, the more we continue to lose control of AI. The second problem is that AI, as the Velvet Sundown story shows, will continue to witness more theft dressed as competition. Right,
Okay.
And that's how I illustrate this. And this is how it ties into the question you are asking me. The point here is that those in the music industry, if you've been following the music industry for some time now, have been complaining about how AI companies steal their work, the work of artists, to build the products or what they call knockoffs. And then they flood the market with these knockoffs, which are, of course, fake. And then people buy this. And that means, of course, less money for the music artists because people buy these ones that don't belong to them. For one, there will be a problem of the identification of what is real oral storytelling and their origin, given that AI is increasingly making our grip of reality shaky. So they might say, oh, this oral storytelling is from the time of Confucius. So how am I supposed to know if it's generated by AI, right? So they may attribute fake oral storytelling to these traditions. That's the first problem. The second problem is the other side of the problem, is that as AI companies have complained in the case of music artists, and it's the case of Velvet Sundown story, there could be production of tons of storytelling that could be attributed to Chinese, and the ones that could be Chinese that people could attribute to themselves. So you now have this blurring between what is oral storytelling, which is real, what is not real, and then people just like, oh well, since I can't tell, I am just going to close my ear to all kind of oral storytelling. And so the ability for these traditions to pass very indigenous values from these cultures and traditions would then be lost because people will not trust what they see, whether it's from China or it's from Africa, unless, of course, we find ways to be able to identify what is authentic, what is not authentic.
Professor Xiang, the Ministerial meeting on civilizational dialogue takes place in Beijing on July 10th to the 11th under the theme Safeguarding the Diversity of Human Civilizations for World Peace and Development. What opportunities does this high-level gathering signal in cultural industries and cross-border infrastructure projects?
Yeah, so I think Professor Diabo already addressed this quite well. If you bring in everybody into the dialogue, then we allow for the possibility that there's more fairness in what gets incorporated. AI, I think of as like a new library of the world's knowledge, as it were. Then there's a decision about what is included, how to include things. So these decisions then shape the nature of that kind of repository of knowledge that all humans are going to access. So I think it is very important that from the design stage, from the very early on inception stage, we have these dialogues so that issues are brought to the fore that some people might not have thought of, and then these issues get kind of inbuilt into the system from very early on. We're very, very aware of how hegemonic certain structures of knowledge production can be, both on just a kind of institutional inertia kind of level. But, if there's this particular system in place and there's a certain amount of inertia for changing it. But then also in the level of a Malaysian sociologist called Said Alatas, he calls the cat mind. That's not necessarily a kind of on an institutional level. That's just on the level of just ideology and thinking. So these things kind of play together to make certain ways of thinking hegemonic to resolve both these issues. This kind of much more global dialogue helps to undercut both those two kinds of systems. And so in the case of AI, then yes, like I said, if you have these kind of conversations early on, you're better placed to be able to undercut and challenge a lot of the way that things have already crystallized. So in this kind of new field of knowledge production, which is kind of AI, then you're potentially allowing for a fairer, more diverse, and more creative ways of knowledge production. It's a very good opportunity, and I think that they made great conversations, very productive conversations that they had.
Okay, thank you there, professors. That brings us to the end of our discussion. Listeners, you can subscribe to our online newsletter on CGTN or Substack to get more insights on China-Africa relations. Just search China-Africa Talk. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Post it on social media or leave a rating and review. Thanks again. See you next time.